Okay, the title of this video is The Controversy of Matthew 24. A couple weeks back, I did a review of the 6th edition, and there were some entertaining comments below from some individuals that decide that they want to hang around during the tribulation. And that was why I revealed or did a video on pre-tribulation rapture controversy, revealing that for some reason it's a controversy for some, not for me, and that a person should have some grace, and the comments against it prove the lack of grace. Kind of a funny thing, I have a radio program in our local area, a very small radio station, and there's a bunch of, I catch wind of quite a few people who listen, especially Dutchies, because I'm Dutchy, but yet they won't come to our church. So that's almost a one church in our area. Then I do pastor 2 literal churches, and then the YouTube is almost an international church, and so it's kind of fun. It's all pleasure to be a part of the Lord's work. And after kind of skimming down the comments on the review of the 6th edition, my son, who presently is a missionary in Costa Rica, gave a masterful conclusion of the long thread of comments. And he wrote down there, after skimming all 77 replies, I feel like the preacher in Ecclesiastes, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. And then he gave a very discerning, wise conclusion. I was very impressed with it. Probably more impressed, or he skimmed the 77 replies. He didn't read them in detail, and often a person can skim something and still get the general spirit of an individual's words. And he wisely wrote, the Lone Star State is a British Israelite that likes to back up his arguments with insults. Yeah, probably so. And then another brother, Mike Wallace, is well-versed in his Bible and has way too much patience to deal with the antagonist. That's probably true, too, but it is kind of fun. I kind of enjoy trying to figure out, a way to try to get to their mindset. But a British Israelite's pretty far down that road. Then his third conclusion was Bald Man's opinion hit the nail in the head when he said the antagonist had his mind made up. Yeah. And then he said there are a lot of informed pre-trib believers on here, which makes me happy. Yes, I agree. That totally makes me happy. And I was pleasantly pleased with the gracious comments back to these people, recognizing, hey, everybody's got an opinion. And then, wisely, on the 5th conclusion, he said Lone Star State will pleasantly be surprised when it gets included in pre-trib rapture, and we all will be mature enough not to rub it in. That's true, too. That's good, too. Again, with that idea, he didn't run around saying, you're lost, you're going to hell, man, you're going to hell because you don't agree with me. And so with those thoughts in mind, there's no harm in the comments of those videos. I look at it as a friendly competition, and it does allow growth. I always learn some things from them. And I don't mind the trolls because that gives free advertisement, and people who are sincerely following something will discern the foolishness of the trolls. And the whole problem in the Matthew 24 controversy, I was amazed when I first came across this idea that some people actually think Matthew 24, all of it, was fulfilled in 70 AD. Wow, that was a humdinger for me when I first came across that. And the problem in deception, as the Bible gives 2 lines of defense, and if you'd go back some previous videos of mine, I give you the 2 lines of defense. And the first line of defense against deception is never to add, subtract, or change a word of the Bible. As soon as I hear a person run to Greek, I get very highly suspicious. That doesn't mean I reject everything they say. It's just that I get very highly suspicious. And then the second line of defense is found in Luke 4, and the line of defense is a failure to rightly divide the word of truth. So these poor people that think that they're going to stick around for the trib, I dare say they are failing to rightly divide the word of truth. They would probably say, I'm deceived, which if you write it on a 3x5 card and send it to me, I'll give it to somebody who cares about your opinion. In the Matthew 24, okay, let's take a gander at it, Matthew 24. And I would dare say we need to look at the entire questions in Matthew 24. And of course, in verse 1, Jesus and the apostles are around the Jewish temple, and the apostle Judas Iscariot, a devil, was enamored with the building. And then Jesus said these stones are going to be torn down. And then the disciples asked him later on privately. They said the disciples came unto him privately saying, tell us, when shall these things be? Okay, referring to the stones of the Jewish temple being torn down. And then they added other questions. I don't know if they realized the time span of these questions, but they did add other questions. And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So there's three questions that the fulfillment of them, the first one historically was, 70 AD, the sign of thy coming. Well, that hasn't happened yet, so we're up to 2,000 years. And of the end of the world, well, that's 3,000 years. So the Lord is going to answer the details of all three questions. Do they discern the differences of them and the time periods? I'm not certain. And so this is looking at the large picture, where often in the Bible, the prophets, when they prophesied, it would have a short-term fulfillment, 100 years, 20 years, whatever. And then there was a long-term fulfillment, and the short-term would probably fall under the realm of instructions, and the long-term prophecy would fall under the realm of doctrine. Okay, so then in verse 21, even if you just simply read this chapter from a Jewish Messiah talking to Jewish apostles about a Jewish nation that will involve the entire world, because in verse 6 and 7, it's world wars, earthquakes, pestilences. And that's just the starter. That's just the starter of it. And verse 13 mentions the end. And verse 14, the gospel of the kingdom. Verse 15 ties in Daniel's 70 weeks. Verse 16, it says Judea. Verse 20, the Sabbath. I mean, how could you miss that Jewish aspect? And verse 21, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. And that's not just Israel. This is involving the entire world. And then if you get down to 29, after the tribulation, what did not take place in Acts 2 and did not take place in 71 AD, or either the dispersion hasn't taken place yet. You see, and then I threw in an idea, kind of an afterthought about the mark of the beast, thinking that possibly there's a possibility that if a person is forced to take it or are deceived, is there an option for them? Because in Revelation 14, the judgment states, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or his hand. Notice, there are at least two elements: worship the beast, including his enemy, and receiving the mark. Two separate elements. And that's not even discussing the differences between the number and the name, which I'll probably do when I get to Revelation 13. Those two elements, worship and mark, warrants, verse 10, hell. And that's repeated in chapter 14, verse 11, who worship the beast of his image and whosoever receiveth the mark. And again, I wasn't being dogmatic on it. And personally, I'm not worried about it. And that someone in the tribulation is going to have revelation to him, which the Lord will do. And with that in mind, and you take in the entire picture of Matthew 24, where it says it's the worst time ever known to man, if a person can't see that 70 AD and the Jews being dispersed is not the worst time ever known to man, that'd be like saying January 6th there was an insurrection, by Trump supporters. What a laugher that is. But still, the idea is that we need to see the entire elements involved. That's what I was referring to on the mark of the beast. You see, I view the Bible as a law book, and God is the ultimate judge. Jesus is the only potentate. Now, I personally have hosted law classes, five separate law classes, meaning 8 hours a day, 5 days, and 5 days, 10 days, 80 hours worth of law training, and then a couple advanced classes of 5 days, so that's another 40 hours. And I see the Bible as a law book. Okay? Paul himself might have been some type of attorney in some way of knowing the Jewish law, taking the Jewish law, being a lawyer, probably pulling in the Jewish law of the Sanhedrin. And here's an example of what I'm trying to say. If you've charged or think somebody has committed fraud against you, in the common law, which is still in effect in America, it's just sort of kind of in hibernation. Common law generally identifies 9 elements needed to establish fraud. And if a person has established 8 out of the 9, then the jury must find the party innocent. I mean, you can have 8 out of the 9, but it's still not fraud. Okay? To bore you, I'll give you the 9 elements. A representation of fact must have been given. Number 2, it's falsity. 3, it's material. 4, the representer's knowledge of its falsity or ignorance of his truth. So the one who proclaimed this so-called fact, which was actually false, and it was a material false, and they knew it was false. Okay, then it says, and a representative intent that it should be acted upon by the person. So the other party, his intent is to declare this in a fashion where the other party is going to contemplate agreeing to it. And the injured party's ignorance of its falsity. So the ignorant party doesn't recognize it was false, and the injured party relied on it to be truthful, and the injured party's right to rely thereon. And then the 9th one is the injured party's consequent and proximate injury. Now, actually, a student at virtually any Bible college can charge the president of the Bible college and its professors with fraud. All 9 of those elements can be met, and I actually sort of kind of started a case like that. And so you got to prove all 9 elements. Okay, give you another example. See, years ago, I got charged with a crime of the unauthorized practice of law. Yes, unauthorized practice of law. And so the knowledge I have, God has kind of forced me into with some of this law knowledge, helps me to see all the elements involved. That's why I said, about the mark of the beast. You got to have worship involved. At least that's what it's looking like to me. Now, on a couple of occasions, I've been asked by somebody in a court sitting, if I was an attorney, and I just smiled and said, well, I've been accused of that, but never convicted. And it's always kind of a funny reaction on their face. Now, let me give you another example. In Habakkuk 2:15, years ago, John R. Rice, an evangelist, used to preach that you shouldn't buy you shouldn't buy anything from a store that sells booze, okay? Back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, okay, many of the grocery stores did not stock liquor on its shelves, okay? And the authority he used for that was Habakkuk 2:15. Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that putteth thy bottle to him, and maketh him drunken also. And so back then he preached that, and some folks, wouldn't buy from a store that did happen to sell alcohol because of that verse. Okay, but try that today. I'm not saying it's any different. He didn't read the entire verse, or at least his interpretation didn't involve the entire verse. Okay, because it says the intent plays so much in our actions. Intention is what God is looking at. And Hebrews 4:12 and 13 says that the Word of God is discerning the intents of our heart. So what is the intent of Habakkuk 2:15 of a guy giving alcohol to make somebody drunk? It says that thou mayest look on their nakedness. That is when the curse is involved. That's when all of the elements are met. That's, I suppose, what Bill Crosby was accused of through either drugs or booze, so that he could have, his jollies with women, and most of them look like transgendered anyway. Okay, and so you see, if John R. Rice is going to try to take that one part which he preached years ago, he is condemning anybody who works at a grocery store, or anybody who serves alcohol on an airline, or maybe a Christian kid where his lost dad said, hey, go to the fridge and get me a beer. No, what is the intent? Is that kid obeying his father? Well, yeah, he's obeying his father. The intent, you see, that's all the elements. All the elements of fraud have to be proven in order to have the charge of guilty. And so in the mark of the beast, the mark is one thing, worship is another. Okay, so what is, with all this conclusion here, what is the purpose of the opposition against the pre-tribulation rapture? Are these folks, what is their intent? What is their purpose? If their purpose is a genuine kindness to the deceived, if their purpose is a genuinely, sincerely trying to help a deceived individual, 1 Timothy 5 verse 1, I would dare say, especially if the other party is older than this opposition. 1 Timothy 5:1 says, rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and younger men as brethren, elder women as mothers, the younger as sisters with all purity. Entreat, that's begging, pleading, that's appealing to. And then the other approach is in 2 Timothy. I mean, if the opposition is genuinely sincere, the other approach is found in 2 Timothy 2:24. And the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men, apt to teach, patient, in meekness instructing those that oppose themselves. And deception always opposes itself, or false beliefs. It always opposes itself. If God peradventure will give them repentance to the acknowledging of the truth. Okay, so if those are the methods that should be followed, if the opposition to the pre-tribulation rapture is genuine, sincere, honest, trying to help out someone that they feel is weak in the faith, Romans 14. But the idea of slinging mud as my son wisely stated, okay, where so-and-so likes to back up his arguments with insults. When you sling mud, my friend, you lose ground. I guess it takes a farm mindset to understand that. I'm not saying there's not a time where you do throw out some rough language, because Jesus did, not to the woman at the well, and not to Nicodemus. But there were times that he did. I would dare say my conclusion of the opposition to the pre-tribulation rapture, I would dare say, is the intent is to show how holy they are, more holy than the ones who think that you're going to get an escape. And there are the righteous ones who will endure through the tribulation and refuse to take the mark of the beast. You see, I'm kind of leaning that route where it's more of a declaration of one's self-righteousness, and that is the basis of all religions. I'm more righteous than you. I'm more holy than you. Now, in the final straw, these opposition, especially when their British Israelism is exposed, is a great encouragement to me. Oh, man, what an encouragement. And the reason why, not for their sake, but for mine, is British Israelism, or a born-again believer who thinks he's Israel and is going to go into the trib, because the tribulation is God's unfinished business with Israel. And that's why Daniel 9 was brought into the mix in Matthew 24:15. The final straw for the church is when Christians, born-again people, and I'm not doubting their salvation, when they think they're Israel. That's found in Romans 11. The final straw for the world is transgenderism and the mutations between fallen angels, animals, and women. That's for the world. That's why the world was flooded twice, Genesis 1:2, even though women weren't there, but it was the mutations and the demonic creatures. Okay, and then Genesis 6, and then Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the final straw for the world. So, now, whenever I correspond with, I suspect to be a British Israelite, I pretty well know that I am not going to convince them, because a man that's wise in his own conceit is more hope of a fool. But I personally learn. Man, any sports contest, I approach that sport. I still play basketball quite extensively. I run a men's basketball league, still playing with the youngins, and I just enjoy playing, win or lose. And I mean, I just enjoy the friendly competition. Now, if somebody wants to get a little bit, unfriendly, then I might match it. I might not. My methods is not a pop in the nose type method. My method is kind of reaching behind the back. I reach, come around their head, reach behind their back, and go like that. And who did that? Okay, that's more of my approach, because I do believe that's more of a biblical approach, where this person has a choice to voluntarily accept the words that you're seeking to persuade them. Why? In order to please the Lord. That's the intent. I hope that this was a help and a blessing to you folks.